Recording. Okay. Can everybody see Swappy? Or Swappy? Swapey? Joshua, this is my first time with OSB, so I'm OBS or OSB, whichever it is, so I'm interested to see how it goes. Please don't forget to mute your mics if you don't have a question or if you're talking in the background. And if we mute you, it's not personal. Feel free to unmute and ask questions by all means, as you know. Cool. So today's lecture is consuming data, consuming APIs with Ruby, basically, is what we're going to talk about. So I'm going to start today with a clean slate, and we're going to build some stuff. I'm going to build with the intent of segueing into tomorrow's lecture, where we're going to finish out a CLI. So that's our plan anyways, that today's plus tomorrow is going to sort of culminate into building a project. And so that's why I'm doing some of the little extra bits that I'm going to do today, like using Bundler to scaffold out a gem. So let's start though. I'm hoping for some participation here. What do we mean when we say API consumption? Like what is that? API consumption. Does it mean we eat APIs with some salt and pepper and whatever other flavorings we like, we consume them? What does API even stand for?
Application Programming Interface.
Yes, Application Programming Interface, and to me, that's such a vague term, right? Because API, Application Program Interface, an application and program are almost synonymous anyway. So an interface between an application and a program. So it could be an AAI, an application interface, or a program interface. So don't get caught up in the terminology. And you'll hear the word API used so often. So we might say the Ruby API. Well, we're just referring to how you use the methods. What do the methods look like? What does the language and the syntax look like? API is like, how do I interact with this thing? So API is a term that's used very, very generally. You're going to hear it very often when we use libraries, whether they're gems in Ruby or whether they're packages from JavaScript or whatever. You're going to see that term. The React API, the Rails API, the Sinatra API. You'll also hear the term DSL for domain-specific language, which is just sort of a more specific version of API. So don't get caught up in the terminology. When we're talking about API today, we're talking, and again, it's like sort of this, we all just agree that this is what we mean when we say API. We're talking about a website that is supplying information to the public or to whomever. It might be private, it might be public, and it's in a certain format. Okay, so exactly, yeah, that's right. Yes, yes, and yes, we eat application interfaces. That's right. So API. I know it can be a confusing term, and right now in the context today, we're talking about a website that's supplying information in a particular syntax in a particular format. So basically our overall goal when it comes to API consumption or scraping is to get information from the web. We want information to build a program, right? We want information about a whole bunch of things, whatever those things might be. It could be NHL teams or soccer teams or locations, weather, whatever it is, whatever kind of application you're building, the internet has information, you want it. How do you get it? Well, you could go to websites and you could copy and paste and maybe paste into a spreadsheet and do some Excel magic or Google Sheets magic and try and pull a bunch of information out that way, and that would be a horrible pain in the butt. You could take screenshots of websites and try and like take information that way. That would be awful. The two, or I shouldn't say the two, but two main ways that we can get mass quantities of data from the internet are scraping and API consumption. Right now in the curriculum, you see scraping, and scraping is basically a way of asking a website, hey, give me all of your HTML. Give me all of your markup, all of the stuff that you have on your site at this moment. Give it to me, and I'll parse through it and figure stuff out. And scraping's cool, right? Maybe a more robust way is API consumption, where a site, so a website might have a nice HTML layout that we human beings can read with our eyeballs, but it also might supply an API. In other words, a bunch of information that's packaged for a computer to use much more in a much nicer fashion. Typically, and I think Enix's going to agree with me on that, API consumption is a better way of getting mass quantities of data from the internet, but it's cool to know both. So today we're going to talk a little bit about scraping, but we're going to focus on API consumption. You're welcome to use either for your final project. It's completely up to you whether you choose to scrape a site or whether you choose to use an API. If you scrape, just understand you run the risk of, if the website changes, all that data you're not going to be able to pull that data anymore, and we've seen that happen before. It's just a pain in the butt. Whereas the APIs tend to be a little bit more reliable. So let's talk about.
They don't always give you the data you want, do they?
Pardon?
They don't always give you the data that you're looking for.
And that statement that you made, Maynard, is correct, and it applies to both scraping or API. You might not be able to get the information you want via scraping. You might not be able to get it via API, and maybe only one or the other gives you exactly what you're looking for your program. That might be the deciding factor for what you choose to do, depending on what your domain is for your CLI project. So yeah, absolutely. They being APIs, they being a website full of scrapable information. Might not give you what you want. Not to mention, not all websites can be scraped effectively. Some websites, particularly that run and are loaded without page refreshes via JavaScript, those can be really, really tricky to scrape as well. So if you are going to scrape, make sure that your website is scrapable. We'll talk a little more about that probably, I guess, next week, maybe in the project support meetings if we need to. Cool. So let's just start with an example of what does an API look like. And I'm going to start with, somebody mentioned Star Wars yesterday. I think it was Enoch. So Star Wars, actually, there's a site called swapi.co, which stands for StarWarsAPI.co. And it's an open API, which makes it really nice. Now, what do I mean by open API?
Available to the public. You don't need like a password or anything.
Exactly. That's exactly right. So some APIs will require that you sign up and that you get some sort of a password or a key that's only associated with you. That's only associated with your your username. Is this thing working? Can everybody hear me okay? Okay. My Slack just froze, but that's okay. Yeah, exactly. So I would generally gently recommend that you stick with open APIs for your CLI project. It's going to be a little bit easier than if you have to sign up, depending on what the API requires of you. So let's just look at an example of this. Here, the Star Wars API is saying, well, hey, we could try this thing. And all right, so let's see what it's telling us. Basically, if we hit this website, https:/domain/people/1, we get this result. And let's actually do that. Let's copy this into a new window, people/1. And let's see. Oh, they don't let us load it? This is not the page you're looking for. Oh no, I didn't have the right website. Sorry. You have to be careful. Make sure that you get the right site in there. I'm missing my /API. So starwars.co/API/people/1. Okay, great. And so this is showing me what the response is going to be that I'm going to get. Does anybody have any idea like what we commonly call this format that we're seeing?
JSON.
Does he know what that stands for?
JavaScript object notation.
JavaScript object notation. That's exactly right. Why is this called JavaScript object notation when we're dealing in Ruby? And by the way, like on the screen here, this isn't JavaScript or Ruby. This is just a response from a website. This is not a question that anyone should be able to answer necessarily. I'm just curious if anyone knows.
What was the question again?
The question is, why do we call this JSON? why do we call this JSON format when JSON stands for JavaScript Object Notation, and we're neither dealing with JavaScript nor anything else? Like,
It's just become very popular.
that's exactly right. And all it is a formatting convention. So it's a formatting convention. JSON is not a language, and it just happens to have its roots in JavaScript, which is why it has the name JSON. But it's just a popular convention. And what does this look like in Ruby? If we were to look at this data structure, it starts with a curly bracket. It's got what appeared it looks just like a hash. And so in JavaScript, we would call something like this an object. In Ruby, we would call it a hash. Other languages have different names: dictionary. I'm blanking on any of the others. Hash map maybe. But so in Ruby, a hash basically is what an object looks like in JavaScript. Now, in JSON format, JSON formatted stuff doesn't have to start with curly brackets. It could also be an array, and it could also be just a string. But very often we're going to see the object. So how do we use this thing? And so now we're going to sort of head back to Ruby land. And in order to make a request to hit this thing, obviously we're not going to be starting up our web browsers and making requests. So what we're going to do is use tools that Ruby provides, gems, that allow us to make requests and get this information. So I'm starting with a blank, clean slate, and intentionally. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to show, and some of you may have seen this already. I'm going to say bundle new, bundle gem, right? Bundle gem. What should we call this? Star Wars API CLI, something like that. We're not going to get to the CLI part today.
You need to use underscores, otherwise it creates separate folders.
Thank you. You're absolutely right. I don't want all that namespacing. And this is just giving me a scaffold to work with, to work from, that we can. We're going to focus on just kind of the dealing with the API consumption and getting data from the internet for this. So let's see what we got here. We got a master folder. Looks like it initialized as a Git repository, and I think we'll go over the ins and outs of this entire file structure a little bit deeper, I think, tomorrow. But today, what I'm going to focus on is my library folder here, which is where I expect to put all my information, and my bin folder, which right now doesn't have an executable in it per se. So what I'm going to do is just open up a new file. I'm going to call it api.rb. And right now, this is just going to be a file that I sort of play around with. And I intentionally built the scaffolding. We're gonna sort of put the pieces together for a more proper gem tomorrow. We're gonna play more with just this file, at least for now, and maybe we'll do some more building out of the actual gem side of things a little bit more today too. We'll see. So,
where did that gem come from? It was bundle gem and.
So the command is bundle gem, and
Star Wars CLI API.
And then the name of whatever I want to call this thing. Okay.
And it built that for you?
Yeah, it just scaffolded out. All it did was created a bunch of files and directories.
Okay. Gave you a structure.
That's all it does. And some of them are populated with a little bit of information. Some of them are completely empty.
Okay.
Okay. And we'll talk a little bit more about that tomorrow. Cool. So right now, what I want to show you are the gem I want to show you that I really want to introduce is a gem called RestClient. RestClient. And I'm actually going to show you two gems. JSON. Okay. And at least for now, we'll come back to, I'll show you more than two, but for now, these two are the ones that we're going to start with, and we can check them out. Let's see, RestClient gem and JSON gem. RestClient is, I highly recommend anytime you use a gem to at least like have a glance at the source and maybe the documentation and see like what's going on and what it says this thing does. Simple HTTP and REST client for Ruby inspired by microframework syntax for specifying actions. Whew, that's a mouthful. I can see my CPU is struggling just a bit. Everybody can still hear me okay though? Okay, awesome. So let's just start with this. What is a simple HTTP and REST client for Ruby? Can anybody break down just that part of this sentence a little bit? And yes, Stephen, this is the word REST there is exactly related to RESTful API. What's HTTP?
Hypertext Transport Protocol.
Hypertext Transfer Protocol. What is that? What is HTTP? What is that protocol?
It's a markup language.
It's okay. I'm okay with it being a language. It's a protocol, as the name implies. And who uses it?
Usually the internet.
The internet. That's it. It is the protocol for communication on the internet. Remember, the way the internet works, you have two computers. They talk to each other, and it's as the first person I heard use this analogy was Avi. It's a game of pitch and catch. And it's just one thing. Somebody throws the ball and somebody catches it and throws it back and catches it and throws it back. It's not like this synchronous communication like we might be having right now, where I'm talking, you could talk, we could all talk at the same time. It's I talk, I throw something at you, you receive it, you throw something back at me. It's request, response, request, response. And what are those requests and response made of in terms of data structures?
HTTP protocol.
Right, but what does it look like if we were to look at a request? What might it look like? Can we look at a request? Is there some way to see it? What if I do? Okay, I could use Postman. I could also just open up my dev tools here in my browser. And with a Mac, that's Command Shift J. I forget what it is with a Windows. It's like Control Shift I maybe. Why is it that different, or F12? So if I click on the network tab here, I can see some interesting stuff happening here. If I refresh my page, I see there's this thing. I don't know, whatever this thing is. It says REST client 200 document, and check it out. I've got all these headers. This is the request. I can see the request headers, all this stuff. Like, I didn't type all that. All I did was type in github.com REST client, and all this other crap stuff, is here. And I can look at the preview of the response that I got very slowly. Again, my CPU is sluggish right now. And then I can look at the response sort of raw, and we see that this is an HTML response. But what I'm getting at is, and we're not going to get too much deeper into this, but these requests and response are basically packaged together, boiled down to these massive strings and inside of them are a bunch of basically key value pairs, or HTML has as tags in it, HTML or XML. So we can have different types. We could have text, plain text, strings, HTML, JSON, XML. I think I just said all those already. JavaScript. We could have all kinds of different ways, but basically they're boiled down to these massive strings that are sent across the internet, received, processed by whoever sent the request, and processed, and then packaged into a big long string and sent back and forth and back and forth. Okay, does that make sense, kind of? Questions about that? Okay, we're gonna step back away from that. So HTTP and REST client for Ruby. So HTTP just means this is going to be a tool used to send HTTP requests. In other words, to send internet requests, right, and get responses. REST implies that we're going to be dealing with conventions around representational state transfer. We're going to get into that down the road. You don't have to like memorize this part of it right now. We're going to get more into this in the Sinatra section. It has to do with conventions around HTTP verbs. Again, this is future stuff. You can kind of ignore this. I'm just telling you what it means for now. And which are post, get, patch, options, headers, delete, etc. And conventions around building URLs that in the simplest and most predictable way possible for doing the things that we're trying to do on the internet. So that's what REST has to do with. So basically, this is a tool for sending internet requests and getting information in Ruby. And then JSON, the JSON gem, is something that's going to help us. It's going to help us parse these responses, and we'll show you what we mean with this in just a moment. There it is. And JSON implementation for Ruby. And basically, I think this is what we want. Yeah, so basically it gives us a couple of methods for parsing, and we're going to look at this stuff for parsing data. This is the one we're really going to use for getting information. So let's just start off with some simple stuff. I'm also going to require pry, so we can stop and call a timeout and look around. And let's think about what it is, before we do anything, let's think about what it is we're going to try to do. Let's say that for my project, I wanted to do something with Star Wars characters. Okay, I don't know what we're going to do exactly yet. Maybe it'll be like a voting system where people can log in and look at stats and maybe leave notes or comments or votes or I don't know, whatever. And so I need to get a bunch of base information about these characters. And I know the Star Wars API has that information. So let's see what we could do. So I know I want to get a bunch of info about Star characters. Okay. When I get that information, in terms of what you've learned so far, what do you suppose I might do with that information? Get the characters and sorry, go ahead, Allison.
Make character objects.
Yes! Oh, love it. Make character objects. That's exactly right. I will use the info to make character objects. That's exactly right. And I'll capitalize that because I'm going to make a class character objects. And I will persist them. And persist is a term incorrectly used here, but you know what I mean. We know what we mean for now. We don't have databases yet. Persist them into a class variable. Okay, cool. So let's think about getting that information. Getting the info. Whoops, getting the info. All right, so what I want to do is send some kind of a request. If I've never used RestClient before, how would I know what to do here?
I think there's a defined structure, isn't there?
Exactly. Where could I find what that is?
Oh, good question. Probably have a web page.
Exactly. Documentation. Google is a good one. I like that, Joshua. But I'm going to start with just the docs, or at least just the even here on the main README on this particular on this GEMS website. And if I scroll down, there's probably a couple of little examples. Could it be as simple as this, restclient.get URL? And this is where we're going to begin. So let's just see. I'm going to say character. I'll just say character. And I happen to know, based on looking at the Star Wars API, that character 1 gives me Luke. So I'm going to say Luke. Whoops. And what I'm going to say is not just Luke. Whoops. I'm going to say Luke info. Luke info. This is Ruby. And then I'm going to try this thing, RestClient.get, and I need to copy this this URL again. Actually, I have it right here, right? Cool, this guy. In quotes. Okay, and then I'm going to put a binding.pry. And I'm going to put goodbye because I don't know if that bug still exists where binding doesn't catch if it's not the last thing, or if it is the last thing. And let's just stop there and see what in the world happens. So I'm going to run Ruby. This is inside of lib. Whoops, where am I now? There we go. Ruby lib Star Wars API API. Cool. Hopefully, if nothing broke, which is never a guarantee. Let's see what we broke. It's really thinking. What did we break? Anything? I'm just double checking my syntax. Okay. Did I break stuff?
You don't need to add the gems to the gem file.
That's a great question. Oh, I love that question. Okay. Do I? That's such a good question.
I guess only if you already have it installed, you don't need to. But if someone else was to use the program, they would need to install it first.
Yes. Okay. So that's right. And a good practice would be to do that, right? So if I want to share a program with somebody that has a bunch of dependencies, typically I'm going to add a bunch of all my gems that I need, all my dependencies to my gem file, and then I'm going to tell that person, you need to run bundle in order to run my program. The way I'm doing it here, I'm kind of shying away from the proper setup, and I'm just playing in this file right now. So right now I'm just playing in this little file, and as long as I require the gems that I need, and I happen to already have these installed on my machine, so as long as I require what I need within this file and I have it installed on my machine, this is going to work. So better practice, load everything into bundle, load everything into your gem file and run bundler and run it properly. What I'm doing is just requiring them in this particular file for now, because I'm just focusing on just the consumption aspect of it. Does that make sense? That's a really great question. Cool? Thumbs up, thumbs down, shake your head, nod your head, whatever. I think I said that backward. I shook when I said nod and nodded when I said shook. Okay. And if you're getting that error, Allison, you may have not, so you know what, I'm going to back up for a second. I like this question, I like this discussion. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say bundle. This is dangerous because I don't know how long it's going to take to install. I don't think it's that big though. So is it uninstall? Is that the right command, Unique? Uninstall? Bundle uninstall RestClient. And that's going to remove it from my machine. Dang it. Bundle uninstall, bundler? No, gem uninstall, that's it. Gem uninstall. Okay. Yes, everything, get rid of it. Okay, it's gone. So now if I try and run my program again, I'm going to get cannot load such file RestClient. And so this goes back to the question, shouldn't we have this in our gem file? And shouldn't we just run bundle every time? The answer is probably yes. But when I'm dealing with one gem at a time, if it's not loaded on my machine, when I go to require it, it's not going to be there. And so Ruby's like, I don't know what that thing is. So what I have to do, and I manually have done this before, it happens to already be living on my machine, which is why it was working for me, is I just need to install it. So gem install, this is installing one gem at a time versus giving all the gems to bundler and saying, hey bundler, install these if they exist on the machine, like get them loaded into memory, and if they don't, go to Ruby gems and get it for me, right? So bundler just kind of takes care of all that for me. Exactly, bundle has been run if you see the gemfile.log. Yes, exactly, cool. So now I'm just going to say gem install RestClient. And if you're not sure exactly what they call it or whatever, just go to that page, and somewhere near the top here, it'll probably say require RestClient. If you see this, there's an implication here that you will need to install it on your machine or bundle it, run bundler if it's in your gem file ahead of time in order to use it. So it's just not loaded locally on my machine. Okay. Is that so? All require does, this is kind of a good little side note, make sure that we feel okay about require. What does require do? Or require relative, do we remember?
Creates a dependency.
I would say, to split hairs, yes, but I would say instead of maybe creating the dependency, it implies a dependency. All it does, I think the way I would say it, all require does is runs a Ruby file. Okay, and by running a file, it's loading a file into memory. And that file might have a whole bunch of other files required and linked from it, but all it's doing is running a file. And we have require and require relative. They both do the same thing. They're just going to run a file. We use require for gems, and in other words, for non-local, for files that are non-local to our current directory. And we use require relative when we're specifying files that are sort of within reach, that we know exactly where they are within our current directory. somewhere relative to where we are. And Ruby keeps track of all those things. This is a little bit of a sort of a side note, but Ruby keeps track of all of your Ruby stuff, your gems, using a little global variable called load path. And all it is an array of paths on your machine where Ruby stuff lives. So, I can say, hey, how many places are there where you're going to look? I'm going to look in 9 directories to look for this stuff. And if I don't find what I'm looking for, then I'm going to get a load error. And right now, RestClient doesn't exist anywhere in these because that particular gem isn't loaded on my machine right now. Okay. This is a little bit of a sort of a sidestep. It's kind of beyond what you need to. You don't need to memorize this. We're not going to ask you about load path necessarily or anything. But I'm just kind of want to make sure we're clear on why this isn't working. That's a good question. Like, why do we get this error sometimes?
I have a question about gem installation.
Mm-hmm.
Is it necessary to save the gem to the root directory, or do you put it in like your the directory that you're saving your
in other words, go ahead.
Like if you have a directory of the GitHub,
Mm-hmm.
the GitHub files.
Sure.
Are you not saving it to that? You would save it to the root directory, right?
So I think let me see if I understand your question. Your question is, does it matter where I run gem install when I'm installing a gem? Is that what you're asking? So like right now I'm inside of this folder. It doesn't matter. What Ruby is going to install it in the place where Ruby lives on your machine, right? Okay. in one of these places, based on the version of Ruby that you're running and the gem that you're putting in there, Ruby is going to automatically choose where it goes. When you run gem install, it's not going to just like only install it in one place or only install it somewhere else. It's installing it in the place where Ruby lives on your machine. So in my case, somewhere user slider in school .rvm Ruby's Ruby 2.6.1 lib Ruby's gems. Maybe that's where it's going to go, something like that.
Okay, so it looks like it goes into the library. Lib.
This is not the same library folder that you see here.
Right, I know.
Okay, yeah. Okay. Cool. Right. So I'm right. I could do this from my root directory. I could, if I cd back to root, or I could just stay right here. Doesn't matter. And I'm going to say gem install RestClient. And this is what Bundler will do for you automatically when you have a gem file. It'll look and see, does it already exist on the machine? If it does, it's going to use that. And if it doesn't, it's going to say, hey, Ruby gems, can you please give me this this gem, and I'll load it onto this machine. And maybe I shouldn't have uninstalled it with 2 recording systems going. Come on, come on. All right. Cool. All right. It's working, hopefully. Cross your fingers. Hold your breath. The last sip of coffee is always, it's like a little tragedy. It's like, oh man, there's no more. While this is loading, any questions on, does bundle install? No, bundle install knows what you need based on what is in your gem file. Cliff, that's a great question. So bundle install, all bundle install does is says, hey, gem file, what gems are listed here? And whatever gems are listed there, Bundler is going to install them into memory, load them into memory, in other words, require all those files and all the dependencies from all those gems automatically for you. It doesn't know automatically, other than what each gem requires. A particular gem might, within its, when you load a particular gem, it might automatically load other gems for you because that gem has dependencies itself. But it's not going to know magically what you need unless you tell it, unless you put stuff into your gem file. So if you don't have a gem file, you have to install them individually. That is correct.
Right? So if there is a gem file and you run bundle install, are you going to get an error if you haven't already installed those individual gems on your machine, or bundle install will take care of actually installing them for you? Bundle install will take care of looking, if it doesn't, it's going to look on your machine first. If it doesn't find what it's looking for, then it's going to ask rubygems.org, hey, rubygems.org, give me this gem. And then rubygems.org is going to say, okay, here you go. Or, have never heard of that thing, sorry, it doesn't exist. Okay, great question. Like if I say gem install waffle maker, there's
no way this is a gem, I'm going to get an error back that says we couldn't find this. I think. Unless this is a gem, which installed version. There you go. Could not find a valid gem in any repository. Okay. So there you go. All right. So let's go back to running. Did I just break my machine? Why is it? Okay. There we go. Interrupted. Great. All right. So now we're going to go back. Any questions about that? Yeah, I would have loved it too if that did exist. I would find a way to use that gem. So any questions about we kind of did a little sidestepping right there, but it's important stuff to sort of at least have a high level understanding of. You don't have to dive super deep into some of that. Any questions about that? About bundling and gems and load paths and that kind of stuff. So let's see what happened when we sent this request to the Star Wars API to people1. Let's see what loaded into Luke info, if anything. Okay, what is this? Just looking at this response, like, can anyone tell me what I'm looking at? What's Ruby telling me right now? What is this?
It looks like the response I got was the JSON hash.
Yeah, okay, so I like that, the response to the JSON hash. And if we look at this thing, remember, what syntax is this? What is this telling me? What kind of a data structure is this thing?
REST.
It's a REST client response object. Remember, if I do something like this, whoops, if I say class dog, and I say dog.new, I get this syntax that's showing me, well, this is a dog object. Well, this is a REST client response object. Okay, and as a REST client response object, it's going to have its own attributes and functionality and whatever it is that we can do with it. So let's, how do I handle this thing? Like, if I look at this thing, one thing I could do if I'm just kind of trying to be blind about it is I could say lukeinfo dot, and I could double tap the tab key, and it says that there's 203 methods available. Sure, let's look at what those methods are. Like, okay, which of these do I use? I don't know. Like, this is a little bit overwhelming, I might say. So if I hit Q on this, basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to say this thing is kind of maybe not super useful, but I know that there is a method called, I shouldn't say it's not super useful. It's not useful if I don't know how to use it. So let's see. This thing, Luke info. Dot, was it body, I think? No. Oh, Luke info. There is a method up here called body, and that looks promising. Let's see what that's going to do for us. And check it out. Now we see this sort of crazy looking string that's all this stuff. By the way, what are all these slashes?
Escapes.
Yes, they're escapes. And notice that because this entire thing is wrapped in a string, and each key and each value is a string, we're using escape characters so that basically we're telling Ruby as we go, this is not the end quote for that quote, right? And so this thing is could be kind of tricky to use, and this is why I've got that other tool there, JSON. What I can do is say json.parse lukeinfo.body, and then I get this really nice looking hash, right? So what did I get out of that thing? Like, what is this thing? It's a hash, right? And so this is now something that feels usable. In other words, I can take, here it is, this guy right here. Now I can look at this thing and I could actually sort of do something with it. Okay. Now, how did I know that those were the methods I needed to use? because I've done this before. Sometimes, so that's it. Like, it's experience. That's it. And might there be other ways, better ways? Who knows? Different ways of dealing and parsing with this information. Could you build a parser to pull this out yourself without using JSON.parse? Absolutely, you could. I have faith in all of you that you could. But I would say sometimes you just have to play with stuff until you've done something a couple times and you're like, oh, this is actually could be a lot easier. Sometimes it's really frustrating to use a new tool because you don't know how to, what you need to use from it. And ask people who have used it. Hey, you've used this tool before. The documentation's a little bit iffy. Like I can't figure out exactly what to do. Anyway, so now I have a genuine Ruby hash with some really useful looking top level keys and values. So now I feel like I could do something with this. Okay. All right, so then let's see. So I think what I might want to do is build, and somebody I think already sort of alluded to this, I'm going to build a character class, .rb. And I'm going to say class character. Oh my gosh, no. There we go. And I'm going to, you guys are going to help me speed load this in a very simple manner. So if I want a model class that has some attributes and then I'm able to sort of quote unquote persist stuff into a class variable, help me build this out in like 10 seconds. What do I need? Name. Okay, so where am I going to put name?
Attribute assessor.
Adder accessor. So we're going to totally use adder accessor and name. In fact, I think it might be useful to look. Let's just say name, height, mat. Let's just grab these. Right? And I'm just going to literally copy and paste because I know the information that I'm getting. So name, height, mass, hair color. Do we really care about hair color? Skin color, eye color. Man, these are detailed, huh? Birth year, gender, and home world. That's all we're going to look at for now. This is more than enough. Whoops. Okay, so I've got my adder accessors, and what else do I need in this class then to accomplish, to be able to build these models and sort of store them in my own little world here? An initialize method. Does anybody remember the fancy schmancy?
You can just put attributes and then do like the tap.
Yeah, attributes. I'll just say adder hash to be sort of verbose. This is going to be a hash of attributes. And I'm going to cycle through that. Do I get the key and value? And what am I going to do inside of here? Does anybody remember the? You said tap. I could use tap, but I think I could use a different. I think send is going to be useful for me. Yeah.
Self.send.
Self.send, and send needs. I need to know what method I'm sending to. It's going to be the name of the key, and then we need what symbol in here?
Key equals.
Key equals. Yes, we just need that equal sign in there because that's going to mean we're calling the setter method, and we're going to pass in the value. And then, so let's just, and for now, let's just go ahead and call self.save. But I don't have this built yet, so what is save going to look like for me?
You'll need a add at all or
Right. Where should I declare this at all?
above the initialize.
Yeah, below the adder accessor.
Cool. And should I declare this thing as something?
Empty array.
Good.
Hash.
Nice job. Cool. And then if I want to be able to see at all down the road, what should I do?
Self.all. Yep, self.all.
Good. Great, and this is a super duper basic, simple version of hopefully what is going to be a useful character class for us. So this would be a model class. Right now it doesn't do much except for keep track of all of its instances. Remember, we could break this up into create versus new. In other words, and I would recommend that pattern. Today I'm just trying to, we have a little ways to go, so I'm going to keep it simple like this. Let's go back to API, and so I know that I know the information now that I've got with this thing, and I know based on playing around in my, where'd I go here? Based on playing around in here, I've got this functionality that gives me a hash. Okay, so I'm going to say, I'm just going to copy this. Okay. And let's see. What I might say here, just to make this a little bit, hopefully this will make it more clear, not less clear. I'm actually going to change the name of this to response, and then I'm going to paste in this guy. I'm going to say character hash equals JSON.parse response.body. Okay, this makes it, even though the language, usually I don't want to go from specific language to general language, but I want you to understand this is the response that I'm getting from the request here, and now I'm going to save it into a hash that's just parsed out and looks pretty. Okay, and we played around in the IRB in the terminal till we found that this was working nicely. Now what I'm going to do is take just a moment to stop and think about how do I actually want to do this? Like, how do I get more than just Luke? Thoughts?
More than just Luke.
Mm-hmm.
Can you iterate from people and then just do the slash and then?
Yeah, I don't know. Let's find, like, where should I go? I'm dealing with an API. The API had a quick example of how to get a single person. Where should I go to look and see how do I get more people?
Go up to RestClient and get rid of the one and put a interpolated variable there.
I could do that. I 100% could do that. But what I would say is let's just go quickly back to the API and see if there's some documentation around getting more than just a person, right? And the cool thing about Star Wars API is that it gives you this little tester. What if I just hit, instead of people one, people? Let's see what that gives us. And check it out. And now we have 87 people here, starting with Luke. And it looks like, if I'm reading this correctly, it looks like basically each of these objects, actually it looks like we're getting one massive object back, and results is storing an array, apparently, of these character objects. Okay, and it looks like there's a bunch of these. So maybe I only need to, maybe I only need some, maybe I don't need a whole bunch of them. So
all 87 people aren't on that page.
Yeah, it doesn't look like it, right? So it looks like I would need to do something to get another page, which we're gonna. Looks like I'm getting 10 if I'm seeing this correctly. I think as I glance through it. Let's just check it out. So let's just send that request again. Where'd we go? Oh, I already sent it, so I'm gonna copy it from here. Let's just get people. Copy this, and I can run this, as you can see, right from the command line and play with it, right? Which is what I'm doing. I'm still in the binding, haven't moved. So now if I see response.body, notice that we get this massive object, and based on comparing what I see here against what I saw in my actual browser, and I do recommend that you kind of compare because sometimes it's a lot easier to read in the browser. It looks like what I'm really looking for is results here. So let's hone in on that for now. So I'm going to say response.body.results. Can I do that, by the way? Can I use dot syntax? No.
If the gem allows it.
And well, it's not the gem allowing it. Remember, we're in Ruby land. We're just in Ruby land. Well, yes, you're right. Okay. So if the gem allows it,
it's defined inside the gem.
That's right. That's exactly right. And what kind of, this kind of weird syntax of like this string there. Like this thing is a string, right? If I say class, I get string. So basically now what I have to do is a little more finagling. JSON.parse response.body, and now I have that hash that I can use, and now I can try and tap into results. And I can't use dot syntax because, or dot notation, because this is Ruby, and in Ruby, how do we get information from a hash? We use square bracket syntax. That's exactly right. Can I do this? We use symbols frequently, but I got nothing back, and that's because here, and properly speaking, in terms of JSON syntax, JSON specifies that our keys are strings, double-quoted strings, and so I actually need to follow that pattern here. Some gems will allow you to switch between strings and keys interchangeably, but that's not out of the box in Ruby when you're dealing with a hash. Okay. So now if I look at my results here, I've honed in on this array, and I can see, let me just confirm that that is an array. Yes, it is. Let's see how long it is. 10. Great. I've got 10 characters, I think. So how could I then use this to get the characters I'm looking for? I'm gonna grab this thing. Okay. So I'm going to change this to, well, let's just, this is characters hash now, and now it's, actually it's going to be characters array equals this thing. There. Okay. So now I have, it appears, an array of characters. Each character is a hash, okay, or represented by a hash. So how could I use now this information that I'm getting to my advantage within my program and actually create these objects? Iterate. Scott, I love it. So let's think about this. First of all, I'm going to exit my binding before I forget. Okay, and then I'm going to think about iterating. So how about characters array, make some space here, dot each, do, what should I call this thing? Character. I should always name my variables according to what they are. So my block argument here, which is a variable declaration, should be called character. I agree with that 100%. And what do I want to do for each character?
You want to instantiate a new character object?
Yes, that's exactly right. So how do I do that?
Character.new, parentheses, character.
That's it. Okay. So let's see if this worked. Now, what's the problem I'm going to have? Does anyone know if I were to run this file right now, what error am I going to get? If I did, now, that's a really vague question. I know of at least one error that I'm going to get.
You haven't required the character class?
Yes, that's exactly right. I think what I would get is undefined constant or whatever module character. I think it says something like that. A name error? Is it a name error? Did I save it? Okay, good. And it's taking its time, huh? Come on. Uninitialized constant, yeah. That is a name error, right? Or is it? I think so. Anyway, so while that's running, we know that that's at least one problem we're going to get, and we're going to take care of that by requiring character. Can I just do that? Will that work?
Wouldn't it be include or extend?
No, because we're not dealing with a module. Including or extending is for a module.
Require relative?
Require relative. Yes, I couldn't tell who said that, but yes, that's 100% correct. Require relative, which means I'm going to require a file relative to where I am. What do I need to put in here? Anything? Will that work?
You gotta put the file path.
Well, so relative means relative to where I am right now.
Right now, right? So you
I'm
don't need
inside
to,
of API. So basically I have a sibling file. In other words, a file in the exact same directory as where I am right now. And I could
okay.
put dot slash. I think I could put nothing, and I think it would work. I can also omit the dot .rb if I want. Ruby will pick that up automatically. Okay, so let's try it again. And let's just see. I wanted to run a little bit of a side-by-side. I'm making a comment here while this is running. I wanted to compare scraping and API consumption, but I wanted to focus on API consumption. And we're going to run out of time before we get to scraping, so my apologies for that.
It's a dollar right there.
Okay, no method error. Films equals. Okay, great. So, ooh, this is a good error. So why did I get this error? Can anybody spot this? Undefined method films equals for character, no method error, coming from character RB line 9 inside of a block inside of initialize. So it tells me where this came from. We're inside the
It's
initialize.
sending you an attribute films, but you haven't got the add or accessor for it.
That's exactly right. So one thing I could do would be to add a bunch more adder accessors. The other thing I can do is I can just add a little bit of logic here to protect against this exact error. And what I can do is I can say, I'm only going to call this method if self dot, is it respond to? Is that right? Enoch, is respond to the right? Let's just test that. I think it's respond to. So like, basically what I want to know is, does a string respond? Yes, respond to, and I think it's a symbol I have to pass. Do I have to pass a symbol or can I pass a string? To I. Yes, okay, cool. So then basically I'm going to say if it responds to this method, then I'm going to call self. Otherwise, it's just going to skip over to the next one. So I'm preventing calling an adder accessor, or I should say a getter method, for a key that's not listed here because that method doesn't exist. And that should then skip those keys that I didn't build adder accessors for. Exit. How many times does it take to spell exit? Does anybody have questions about that? Respond to is a method available to Ruby objects. And what you're doing is you're saying, excuse me, Ruby object, have you got a method available called, and then it's whatever it is. You could pass in, I believe, a symbol or a string. Let me just confirm that you can pass in a symbol too before I say things that aren't true. So if I say umbrella dot respond to length as a symbol, the answer is true, whether I write it as a symbol or as a string. In other words, a string, in this case umbrella, does in fact have a method called length. Does it have a method called potatoes? And the answer is no, it does not. Okay, so respond to, that's the method. This is coming from Ruby. That's a Ruby method. It's available for objects, and so that's what's going on there. Whoops, sorry. Okay, so hopefully, I know we're pushing our time here. Does it need an end as well? Oh, that's such a great question. So Ruby allows us a couple of shorthand and shortcut syntaxes. And one of them is I can tag a standalone if statement at the end of a line. And what will happen, so I don't need an end is the direct answer. And the reason is I can use an if statement or an unless statement, the inverse of if, at the end of a line of code in Ruby. And Ruby will run this code if we get a truthy value from this condition, and there's no end needed. So it's a nice little shortcut you can sometimes use. It's exactly the same as wrapping it in an if statement with an end as well. That's a great question. Good call out. Well, unless is just the inverse of true. You can use unless as well. So I could say unless.
Can you use while?
Can you stick while at the end? No, well, no, because you would never break out of it. How would you update your?
You'd
your
add
control?
like a count inside the iterator and then just while
Well, then
found
you
this
would.
list. I don't know if that makes sense. Forget it.
I guess I don't. Maybe well, you know what? You know, people you ask questions, we get answers. Let's try it. So I'll say, let's see. Let's say counter equals 0. Counter puts. Let's see. Puts. Counter plus equals. Can I do this? Whoops. Well, that didn't work. I'm trying to think of how we would make sure that it increments. So counter.
Just do like counter plus minus 1,
Counter
or 5 times
equals.
counter plus minus 1, and then while count is less than 2 or something. I don't know if that made sense.
Oh, I guess yes. So the answer is yes. You can. There you go. Yep. Cool. So then, yeah. So unless is just the inverse of if. So if I wanted to use unless here, which wouldn't make sense because it would be more work. Unless not that is the same as if that, right? So unless and if are just inverses of each other. Let's go back to and see, now that we're here, the big sort of drum roll is, do we have our characters? Character.all.count. There are 10 characters. Let's look at them. And if we look, there they are. Each one has birth year, eye color, gender, hair color, all that stuff, name, etc. Stephen, you're going to build a base for your CLI class the same way. We recommend, in fact, we would ask you all to use, unless you really want to try and build by hand, you're going to use gem. What is it, new? What did I say? Gem new? New gem. No, bundle gem. Bundle gem, then the name of your app, and that's going to scaffold out your structure. The only things I added are the character class and this API file. And you're going to basically do the same thing. You're going to grab the gem you're going to use for your API consumption or scraping if you're using Nokogiri or whatever. So I would say you don't really need this code. I'm happy to share it, by the way, to answer your question, but you don't need it. It's going to, in 2 seconds, you're going to have the same sort of scaffolding, and you've already practiced, hopefully, this kind of a model class enough that this code is going to come pretty. This should feel good by now. You should be like, this is what a model class looks like. I can keep all my things. I have my attr accessors. I can initialize something. In fact, yours should be better maybe because you could have create from hash or new from hash and separate out your sort of saving versus non-saving. You don't have to, but yeah, and they will be varied for sure. Your code's going to be varied. What it is that you want to do, but your model classes are going to look pretty similar because they're going to have attributes. And they're going to be able to be saved and stored in these class variables. What we haven't really looked at are things like building more functionality, either instance or class methods around your models. So maybe each model, maybe you have a finder method. I only want to find characters whose names start with Luke, or characters who are older than something, or characters who have whatever eye color. I don't know. So there's a lot more you could do with your model class, and of course your CLI class is going to be the conductor, which we didn't talk about today at all. That's going to be the conductor, the controller that's controlling all the action. Okay, so yes, you can have this code. That's fine, but you're going to build your own, and we do recommend that you use bundle gem to scaffold.
Is there like a good list to choose from for open APIs, or just Google?
I would say just Google it. Google it and play with whichever result you find, because, and the reason I say that is like each of you, why am I going to google.com? I can just search open API list. So I don't know what you all want to build for your projects, and your domains are going to be varied. There are lots of open APIs out there. Some of them are going to be great. Some of them might be garbage, and you're going to have to just sort of play with them a little bit. And as you can see, there's a ton of results already just from typing in open. You might just say free API, free open API. Some of them are paid. So find a free open API from one of these lists that you find from a Google search, that corresponds to what you want to do. Play with it, make sure that you can use it. So before you go building your project around an API, just open up a file like I did with RestClient, or even just from your binding or from your IRB, and just make sure you're getting the data you want. Now, a couple of pointers in the right direction. I know we're over time. We wouldn't want a file that looks like this. I'm going to stick all these into, put these into a dependencies and or gem file. Okay, and then I'm going to put this functionality, really should be wrapped into a class. So maybe I would have something like class API. And basically I could have like maybe in my initial, I don't know, like, I might have like base, maybe a class constant called base URL, and that's going to be this. In my case, something along those lines. And then maybe like get, I'd have like a def get all characters, and it might be something like that, right? We don't need these anymore. Okay, and so now this is actually starting to look a little nicer, because now I'm wrapping this functionality into a class. And so then I'm going to build an executable file up here. So I'll say run me, or just call or whatever. I'll say run. And it's not going to be .rb. I'm going to use a shebang line to tell shell to use Ruby. Then I'm going to like say character or CLI.start or .run or .call or whatever I want to call it, CLI.new. It's going to look something like this. And somewhere inside of this method that I haven't built yet, in this class that I haven't built yet, I'm going to, when this thing loads, maybe I want to load up all my characters. Or maybe I want to wait till somebody chooses from a menu to load up all the characters, something along those lines. So then I'm going to pull all the functionality and have it run exactly when I want it to. And sometimes some of the stuff I might do up front, and I'm going to get information right away. Other information I might wait until someone requests it, and then I'm going to reach out and get that information. Okay, something along those lines.
How do we handle HTTP errors?
In what way? Like what kind of an HTTP error?
Well, I mean, like edge cases, if you 500 or whatever, 300.
Sure, that's a good question. So first, hopefully you're going to write code and you're going to play with your API enough to know that you're not going to allow a bad request to go through. But if it does happen, just for fun, suppose that we said we hit pancakes. Okay, if I save that and let's see. I know if you have to run, by all means run. So let's see. I got this. This is going to be, whatever. That's good enough. Where do I want to put a binding here? I guess here. So in other words, suppose this is some sort of a user input. You're going to want to make sure that it's valid. And so don't even allow this to happen. But if it did happen, what would we do? Well, what could we do? Oh yeah, I put my binding in the wrong place, didn't I? Did I not save it? I got my binding. Why is it not? Oh, see, that's where remember I said it doesn't catch if it's the last line of code in the file. That's why I do that. I don't know why that is. It's a weird thing. There we go. Okay, so now what I put it into a class, right? Dot new dot, what did I call it? No, not 4,000. Okay, get all characters. There we go. No, get all. There we go. Okay, so here we got this error, and this is kind of what you might see if you get that kind of an error. And so here I've got abstract response, blah blah blah, exception with response. There was a problem. Something went wrong, and I'm not going to tell you exactly what to do with this. I would say the first line of defense is to make sure that you are that you just don't allow a bad request. Make sure that anytime you're about to send a request, that it's locked. There's no way that you're going to send a request that doesn't already exist in the API. You've tried it. You protect it. Suppose that this would be like, basically just to kind of to drive hopefully my point. Suppose that instead of getting all characters, we're getting one character at a time. So this would be people, and I'm going to take like the ID number, right? So then people, and like you said, we could interpolate this using ID. So before I call this method, maybe in my CLI class or whatever, I'm going to make sure that this ID is a valid ID according to the API. So I'm going to check and see. So somewhere in my CLI class, I'm going to say if ID dot to integer is in the range of what I know are the valid IDs from that API, we're going to go ahead and call this method. Otherwise, I'm going to go back to the user and say, I'm sorry, that ID doesn't exist. Something along those lines. That make sense?
What about server down cases and things like
So that's a great question.
you expect, right?
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. In that case, then we have to look at something like a little bit better error handling on our end, where we might start running begin rescue.
That's what I was getting at.
And we're not expecting you to go to that level of edge cases and error handling. If your website is down, if your API goes down during the assessment, like we're not going to hold that against you. Like, we're going to figure out a way around that. And if you don't have that properly error handled, we wouldn't count it against you. If you get to the point where everything's running solid in your app and you really want to incorporate that, then we can talk about how we might do that.
Okay.
All right.
Thanks.
Awesome. Any questions? I'm sorry we're over time here, but any questions about anything we talked about today at all? Any of the stuff or the things? I know we didn't get to scraping. We'll talk a little bit about scraping tomorrow. We'll take this and hopefully flesh it out a little bit better so that it looks better, and start wrapping it into an actual CLI, or I should say incorporate a CLI as well. But at least we have a good start, hopefully, to work from. Well, thank you, everybody, for your attention, your questions, your participation. Always good to see you, and we'll look forward to seeing you all again tomorrow morning. Everybody have an awesome rest of your day.
The recording has stopped.
Real quick, how do we see the schedule for when we're going to have our meeting this week?
So let me hang on one second. Let me just stop.